What happens if you can't do it within 5 days? Good question. If I'm on holiday for 2 weeks, I won't know about the 5 days. My only recommendation to you is to send an email straight back to the editor when you receive a letter like that, saying, I acknowledge receipt of your referee's reports and I note the deadline of 5 days. Could I please have an extension to 20 days or whatever it is that you require? Journals put a limit on the response time because they want to keep the process going. They don't want you to come back a year later and say, oh, I've revised the manuscript, can you now consider it? They've forgotten what your paper was about. The referees don't want to see it again. That's why they want you to do it quickly. So if you can't do it within the time they specify, go back and ask politely for an extension.
Actually, how many days?
Up to you.
No. I mean, when the editor sends that, and then how many days or weeks that they are providing?
No, I'm saying you should make an assessment of whether 10 days is enough or 20 days is enough, and ask the editor for permission for it to be 20 days.
For myself, actually, I think almost 2 weeks. But for my friend, just only 1 day. With the check the grammar. Then my friend have to employ and send to the company. Very expensive. Because we need to learn. But I just want to know actually all the journals, how many days that they allow us to revise and submit.
I'm not aware that many journals have a time limit. In my case, I've had to write to authors 6 months after I've sent them the report saying, are you still alive? Am I likely to get a revised version from you? And normally I get it within 48 hours. They've just been lazy. Most journals will not have a limit on that. But you don't want to leave it too long, you go stale yourself. The longer you leave a piece of work, the harder it is to come back to it. You need to keep going on the manuscript to get it accepted. You put it away, it just is harder and harder to come back to. Other questions about editors, journals? You did make an important comment just then that I think is worth a little bit of discussion. Let me just finish this point. I'll come to you. The question is the question of English language. Have you not got somebody that the university uses to help you with your English language? I agree, you can go to companies, but they're very expensive. And they don't necessarily understand science, which is hard.
In our community, we have one native speaker from United States, but they are computer something like that, computer science, but they don't understand our field. They just revise the grammar that help us to
Yeah, it's very hard for you, and I don't know how to advise, but there are retired people that perhaps would be prepared to help. I'm not sure. But you do need native English-speaking people to make a difference, I think. Okay, now, question here.
Nowadays, it seems like many journals require you to recommend referees. Say at least 3 referees to your submission. Do
question is, or the point is that many journals now require you, when you submit your manuscript, to suggest the names and addresses of 3 referees that might be contacted to look at your manuscript. How do you approach that? Well, the first thing is you can't recommend, well, you shouldn't be recommending anybody that's already a co-author on the paper. Seems obvious, but people do that. Crazy. Nor would I suggest you should recommend anybody from your department. In Thailand, I think there's enough people in other, if you want somebody from Thailand that might be familiar with the crop or the environment or the soils or the farming practices, clearly people at Kasetsart University, people in Chiang Mai at Cant, people in the, is it Department of Agriculture or Ministry of Agriculture? Department of Agriculture, the scientists there. Those sort of people are the ones I would be recommending if it was a paper that was highly relevant to Thailand. If it's one that's highly relevant to post-harvest biology, then you know who the scientists are around the world, you know who you've interacted with, you know who's been to conferences here. So I would look at some of those people, Julian Hayes, Errol Hewitt, people like that you know.
So do we need to contact that person?
No, you're not supposed to contact them. You only recommend to the editor who those people might be. Now the editor will pick, of the 3 you recommended, the editor might only pick one of them. And the editor will pick 2 other people that are completely off your list. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. And why do they have such requirements?
Because there's no way that an editor knows who all the experts are around the world. Just the journal that I'm involved with, we're dealing with berry crops, apples, citrus, hops, figs, every crop imaginable. I don't know who all the experts are that work on those fields, and there's no book you can look up for that. So they need your help. Other questions about editors or referees? All right, who should be an author on your paper? Who should be an author on your paper?
To be the author.
The head of the department?
The researcher.
The person that wrote some of the grant application? Your technician? All of those people? None of those people? How are you going to decide?
Contribution.
How are you going to decide? It's a very, very sensitive issue. It's one that leads to lots of arguments. So I have some suggestions for you. I wasn't joking when I said the head of the department. Sometimes you can have very senior, very strong-willed people around you that demand to be recognized on your work. There are people who are jealous of what you do and don't want to be left out. They want to be part of the action. There's sometimes people that you've had big arguments with, and they might deserve co-authorship, but you don't want them to have them. All these things happen. And you need to get them resolved before you start the research, preferably, and certainly before you start writing. Because the longer you leave it, the harder it is to address it. So I have some suggestions for you. Consider the following. Who had the idea? Who had the idea for the research that's in your manuscript? Who designed the work? Sounds simple, but who was the person that decided what treatments to include, what experimental design to use, what frequency to harvest, whether to pull data, whether to block the experiment? Who sorted out the calibration of the equipment? A whole lot of things around the experimental design that took a lot of time and effort for people to sort out. Who did the work? Who drove for 4 hours and collected samples and drove home again for 4 hours? And then spent all night analysing the fruit? Who put all the data into the computer and analysed it the right way? So who decided what stats package to use? Who had the training to use that stats package? So who analysed the data? And who wrote most of the manuscript? Who actually sat and did the writing? Did 3 or 4 people do it? Did one of you do it? Who did the writing? My suggestion is that if a person is involved with at least 3 of these 5 steps, then they deserve to be an author or co-author. 3 of those 5 steps. Not 2, 3. 4 or 5, no problem. So the technician that did a lot of the research, no, not a co-author. They might have worked very, very hard. They didn't do any writing, they didn't do any data analysis, they didn't think up the original experimental design or the idea. They did some very hard work, they got paid for that in the lab, that's fine. So think about it, 3 of those 5 steps, and you've got people that can have their names on the paper. You still have to resolve the order of authorship, but I'll leave that to you to think about. Think about this. I've used it for 40 years and I found it to be very, very helpful. Stopped a lot of arguments, got people to focus, got people to understand where the real efforts were, and accepted it. Any comments about that? Save yourself embarrassment, save yourself a lot of sensitivities by dealing with this issue early. Now, what I said about the technician was very positive. And remember that there are a lot of people that help you in your research. The farm staff, the grower that you got the trees from or the fruit from, the funding agency that paid for your work to get done, the statistician that you might have gone unbothered because you didn't know how to properly put in the data for the design that you had, or you had missing plots. People that you borrowed equipment from. Maybe the people over in physics had some equipment that you used to measure the fruit strength with or something. They deserve to be thanked. What about the people that just gave you advice? These people can all be acknowledged on the paper, but they don't need to be co-authors. So in the acknowledgement section, and there's some examples here in the PowerPoint summaries that you've got, several examples of acknowledgements where technicians, funding, and growers are thanked for the material that they've provided. The acknowledgement section is also the place where you put disclaimers in there about your university or your department not endorsing the chemical products or a particular company's products that you've used. So if you have to make a disclaimer, you put that in the acknowledgement section. A number of ways of doing that. Those are two of them. There's a third one there. In this case, thanking somebody for the funding, these people for the bulbs, these people for statistics, these technicians that help with the data, and acknowledging that this was part of a PhD thesis. So remember to thank the people that have helped you. It doesn't take a lot of effort to do it. And if you're a technician, it's pretty nice to see your name in the paper that's been published on the work that you've worked hard on. Any questions or comments about acknowledgements? No? They normally go at the end of the paper, just before the literature cited. Sometimes they can be also on the front page. All right, last session, last piece of presentation. So let's just quickly summarise what we've gone through and what you might do to use that information to write a manuscript. First question, what group of results are you going to put into the paper? What group of results? What story are you going to tell? Remember that? What take-home messages can you see in the data that you want to use? What are the main conclusions? What are the main recommendations from the data that you're going to include? What data should be included? What data should be rejected? What's the main story? What's the main focus that you're going to use the data for? Who's your target audience? Who are going to be the authors and in what order? Notice we're going to do that very early on. Who will do what in the preparation of the manuscript? Are you going to give 6 people co-authorship and not expect them to write anything? No, they should be writing parts of the manuscript. And what time frame is reasonable? What time frame is reasonable? Now you might be going to the Horticulture Congress in Brisbane in August, in which case you've got 6 weeks. But 6 weeks normally wouldn't be long enough given all the other commitments that you have on your time. So be realistic about how long it will take you and your co-authors to write the manuscript, and come to some agreement that you're going to have your first draft in 8 weeks' time or 10 weeks' time or by the end of July or whatever you decide it is. I would then suggest that within the department you give a seminar on what it is that you're going to write the paper about. If you're going to stand up here and give a seminar, you're going to have to get your ideas sorted out. And if you people are doing your job when I give that seminar, you'll ask a lot of questions which will help me focus on writing a better paper. So I suggest you perhaps have a seminar. Get working on what the most appropriate journal is going to be, and make sure you read the instructions to authors at the start. At the start. Because you can set up your word package to help you meet the style requirements. Prepare the tables and figures. We had a good session on that. Then draft the results section highlighting the take-home messages that you want to leave with the reader. Just draft it up, get your tables and figures sorted out, and work out what the story is. Perhaps at that point, write some bullet points about what might be included in the discussion section. Draft the paper's title. Remember, we're focusing on the results still. What's the take-home message? What's the story? So having a think about the title at that point is not a bad idea. Start working on the materials and methods. But do that when you're a little bit tired. And really focus on writing the introduction. And remember the overview, the literature survey, the gap, the objectives. Draft the discussion and remember the 6 points in there that I told you about. Draft the abstract. Remember the 5 points in the abstract. Some of which you'll take from the introduction, some of which you'll take from the materials and methods, some of which you'll take from the results, some of which you'll take from the discussion. Have a think about keywords. And finalise the first draft. Finalise the first draft. At that point, the co-authors should be sharing it amongst each other and getting it ready for revision. But don't do that straight away. Put it aside for 2 or 3 or 4 days before you come back to it. Take a break. Take a break because you go blind. You can't see the obvious. Take a break and refresh. But only 2 or 3 or 4 days, not longer. Not longer, otherwise you'll just find too many excuses not to come back to it. So refresh. Print a copy. Print a copy. Don't rely on the computer screen, print a copy. Read through it, make notes, make edits on the paper copy, make improvements. Read through it again, edit it again, make improvements. And do that around your co-authors. Check the subheadings. Have you used subheadings? Remember I recommended you use subheadings in the results, the materials and methods, and the discussion. Are they the same? We saw some very good examples of subheadings in one of the handouts. Think about using subheadings. They're very helpful, but make sure they're consistent across the different sections. By the way, when you print off a manuscript and you're reading it, and this is why you should print it, not rely on reading it on the screen, take a piece of blank paper, put it across the page, and read one line at a time. Why do you do that? You do that because your eye naturally reads text down the middle of a page and makes some assumptions about what is at the end of each line. So if you you hold the paper to a line, force your eye to read the whole line, then the next line, or the whole sentence. And if suddenly you're going, oh, where's the full stop? Where's the full stop? Where's the full stop? You've forgotten my comment about write short sentences. But use that trick. Put a piece of paper across the page and force your eye to read each sentence, each line. You'll be surprised what you find. Have you used those topic sentences? Have you tried to use those link words to help the reader read from one paragraph to next, to understand what the topic is of that paragraph? We saw some good examples of that. Use the word package to check spelling and where word will do it, punctuation and grammar. So if you see that green line under a sentence, ask yourself why Word doesn't like it. It'll be because your tense is wrong, because you've used plurals where you should have used singulars or vice versa. There'll be a whole lot of reasons for that. Don't just ignore it. Try and figure out what it means, because it's signaling to you that it's not right. Check the references. Are all the references in the text in your reference list? Are all the references in the reference list cited in the text? Don't be lazy about that. Go through and check them all each way. The referees will, so you might as well do it and get it right before they see the problem. Make sure you are meeting the journal formatting. And don't do it your own way if the journal insists that it be their way. You don't matter. And I've given you in handout number 17 a checklist that you can look at to help you go through and do all of that. Good luck. All right.